Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Yesha if you're new here, and today marks the first video of I believe, three-part series. Yeah, 3 parts of me reviewing every resource that I used for the core exam. So this is part 1. I'm going to be reviewing all of the QBANKS or question banks in this video, and the next one will be all the books I used, and then the last one will be random resources that I use that aren't books or QBANKS. So if you're interested, keep watching. The first question bank I want to talk about is RadPrimer. It's probably the most familiar to radiology residents around the country. A lot of radiology programs will provide it to you for free. So if you have it provided, you absolutely should utilize it. I'm not sure about those who didn't have it provided. I think you can buy it on a subscription basis, but I've heard it's pretty expensive. RadPrimer is a huge question bank. It's 5,800 questions, which is the most questions out of any of these. It's divided into beginner and intermediate questions, and I would say the most high yield for the core exam are those in the beginner section. The pros are that it's huge. It'll pretty much go over every concept. I think the basic section is definitely the most high yield, and it goes over anatomy, which a lot of other question banks don't do. So I think for those reasons, RadPrimer is really good, and the fact that most programs have it for free. The cons, though, I really believe that it's not that high yield as a whole. The beginner questions are great, but when you answer the questions, you'll notice that a lot of them have multiple right answers. And for me, I find that to be very confusing. Like, I'm like, okay, so if all of these are reasonable alternatives, or if I choose a reasonable alternative, I'm like, how do I... It doesn't work for me. I like to be right or wrong. I don't like this gray area where 3 of the answer choices are right. And it also doesn't give you a good perception of how you're doing, because if you pick any reasonable alternative, all of those people get put into the correct percentage. So it'll say 100%, but there are 4 right answers. And so it's like, it doesn't really tell you how many people actually chose the answer that you're choosing, if that makes sense. So for me, it was not a good indicator of how I'm doing, and I just did not find it to be useful in that way. The other con about it is that it's really neuro heavy for whatever reason. It's like half neuro questions, and obviously that's not how the exam or real life is set up. So I did not appreciate that about RadPrimer, and so for those reasons I think it's really useful to do. I wouldn't stress out about finishing it if you can't, and also I thought the physics was a little bit not representative of the exam. I thought the physics was really challenging, and so yeah, for those reasons I would say that RadPrimer is something you should do as a resident for learning, but not necessarily as core prep. I think it's a really good question bank just to learn radiology, but the basic section is definitely where it's at if you're using it for core prep. And don't stress out if you can't finish the whole thing. The second question bank I want to talk about is Qevlar, which is spelled with a Q, Q-E-V-L-A-R. And Qevlar is actually a question bank that some people use for the board exams. Not really used otherwise, I would say. It's mostly used for core prep. Qevlar is probably not provided to every residency program. It costs about $100 a month or $150 for 3 months, which is probably what you would use if you're doing it before the core exam. It has about 2,000 questions, and I did about 1,000 of those. And I would say the pros of Qevlar are that it definitely hits on topics that you don't get on other QBanks or in other resources. And that being said, the con is that some of that stuff is minutia. And another con is that it's definitely more challenging than the real exam. I would say I scored about 10 percentage points lower on Qevlar than I did on BoardVitals, which I'll get into next. But it's definitely more challenging, but obviously more questions are better if you're someone who can study that way. I am overall happy that I used Qevlar. I did about 1,000 questions, like I said, and I think it did just hammer some points. And I was happy that I got to see a little bit more, some random, minutia things that I didn't see otherwise. But I think if you're in that crunch time, it can be a little overwhelming, and seeing your score 10 points lower than BoardVitals is kind of disheartening. So if you're going to use it, probably use it in the early part of your study period so that it doesn't totally kill your morale. But otherwise, I think it is a good resource for studying. The next one I want to talk about is BoardVitals, which is everyone's favorite QBank, and that's for a reason. It's about 1,300 questions. It costs, sorry, I have to use my cheat sheet. It costs, how much did it cost? $250, $240. So it's not cheap by any means, and there's lots of promo codes. Make sure you can get it during I think I got it on Cyber Monday. You can get it, there's so many codes out there. I think Dr. Cellini has his own, so you can find a promo code to get 20% off somewhere on the internet, but it's still a little bit expensive. That being said, it's definitely the best question bank that exists for the core exam. The questions are very similar to the exam. They're shorter, there's more pictures. So I think that style really emulates the exam. But other than that, I think it hits on the really important topics that you have to know for the exam. It's very high yield. The only con I would say is that the physics section is like a little bit weird. I definitely did not, I just didn't really do well on it, and I didn't think it was a lack of my knowledge. I think the questions were just confusing for whatever reason. So I didn't love the physics section on it, but I thought the rest of the questions were like really amazing and on point. And the other cool thing is if you're part of the Discord, I think a lot of people are saying that the percentage and the percentile that you have on BoardVitals can correlate to like a specific score. And if you're on the Discord, then you can actually look at the graph and see where you fall. And I would say for me, that was very accurate, like very accurate. So I did about in the 80s for BoardVitals, and that correlated to my score pretty well based on how everyone else was performing. So I think for that reason, kind of gauging your progress, BoardVitals is really useful for that. The last QBank I want to talk about is a physics QBank, and it's an app called Radiology Core. It's like a green symbol with an atom symbol on it, and I would say this is the best resource for physics. So obviously, and I said RadPrimer sucks for physics, I said BoardVitals sucks for physics, but this is definitely where it's at for a question bank related to physics. It's like 500 questions or so, and it's an app, it's $10. And I would say do the whole thing, like just do every question. The only con for me was that it's only available in an app format. So I used my iPad, but using your phone I feel like would be kind of hard if you really want to like take notes on it or anything. Like I ended up taking a lot of screenshots because it's hard to you can't copy and paste from it just because it's in an app. So for me the format was like a little bit difficult, but otherwise it's an excellent resource. The explanations are short, they hit on really high yield physics topics. And I would say if you're doing well on that, then you can expect to see those same similar type of topics on the actual exam. And the questions that were on RadPrimer, I would say were so different and so way off that I really used Radiology Core a lot more, and I think it was definitely more similar to the exam. And it's pretty easy to use. I would say it's really not difficult to use. It's just kind of the format of the app that I don't like, but it's otherwise an excellent resource for physics. I hope that was helpful. That was kind of faster than I expected. There were other QBanks that exist that I didn't use. For example, Ant Mini, which people say is really useful. I think it's free, and people say it's really good for non-interpretive skills. And then I'm sure there are others that exist that I did not use. So obviously I can't speak to those because I didn't use it. If you were paying attention, you'll hear that the only question bank that I really finished in its entirety was BoardVitals. I did not finish RadPrimer. I did most of Radiology Core. And I only did half of Qevlar, but I think that's more than enough as long as you start to see the same concepts being tested over and over, and that's how you know you're studying the right things. So in any case, hope that was helpful, and I will see you all on the next one. Bye.